Okay, class, welcome to a new week, October 24th. And this week is basically, there's not a lot going on except, well, there is a lot for you to finish up your graduate or undergraduate synchronous lesson. And you'll do some readings first. These are some good research reports on proven strategies for teaching at a distance and a model for synchronous learning using the internet. So you'll read through those and make sure you have an idea about how those are going. And as you complete your synchronous lessons, make sure you pay attention and take into account the readings that you've had during this unit. And so those best practices that you've read about and that you've learned about, incorporate those into your synchronous lessons. So those are some things to take into account. And then I believe I've introduced the assignments pretty well, but the graduate students, of course, will be using an online tool that's already available, and then the undergraduate students will be using Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. So be sure to let me know when you have an idea of the time that you're going to be using Collaborate Ultra, because I do need to set up a meeting time for you, or a room for you, I should say, that you can use. And I'll set one up that lasts for a long time. That way you can go into it at any time and work and test it out before your lesson as well. But yeah, send me an email, let me know when you're going to be doing your synchronous lesson with Blackboard Collaborate Ultra, if that's the tool you'll be using, and that's primarily undergraduate students will be using that tool. So really that's the assignments for this week. Remember, for undergraduate students, you do need to record your Blackboard Collaborate Ultra session and then give me the location to that recording so that I can review it. But for graduate students, you are not required to record your session. Instead, you do that worksheet that allows you to reflect upon your experience teaching from a distance. So that's what's going on this week. But I was away last week to a conference, Association for Educational Communications and Technology, and it's really the premier conference on this area of educational technology and for research and practice in the field. So it's a nice one to go to. And I wanted to share a few of the lessons that we talked about. So one of the first sessions I actually went to was about distance learning. And if you're a teacher of distance learning, how do you actually save time? What are some ways to do this quickly and easily? So it was a more practical session for sure. But some of the practices that they shared included creating introduction videos like this very one that I'm creating now and having those for a class. But they also talked about maybe making those videos last for several semesters. And that makes sense. I don't do that in my class. I do a video for every class, but for every week. But you can create videos that are a little bit more general and that would last for several semesters maybe, so you don't have to recreate those every semester. There's actually a tool within Google Docs that allows you to dictate, and so you could maybe give feedback to students on their assignments by dictating or talking into a microphone and having it write what you're talking within Google Docs. And I understand that tool is actually pretty good for dictation, so that's something to be aware of as well if you have Google Docs. Let's see, allowing various formats for students to submit items. It's also reminded us that we could do video and audio formatted feedback. And in fact, in D2L, there's a way to give students audio feedback on their projects. So let's say they submit something into the Dropbox. You can actually click the record button and record an audio greeting to that student and talk about their assignment as you go through it. And then they can listen to just that. And that requires no typing. Sometimes students also don't take a look at that feedback that we give them, so they might listen to the feedback instead. And then it mentions also using rubrics and having various items in a list that you commonly go back to when students submit something. So let's say a student submit an assignment and you find that many of the assignments that they submit have the same problems or issues. You can have that as a specific piece of feedback that's ready for you to use anytime you grade that assignment in the future. So those are some things that I learned about just using your time a little bit more wisely with distance learning. Another one that I learned about is this new concept that splits out social presence into different types of presence. And so it's actually thinking about new ways of presence in online teaching, and all of these are important. So, of course, we talked about social presence before. That's the, am I available and willing to communicate? Is the instructor available? Are the other students available? And willing to communicate quickly and give feedback and so forth. But there's another type of presence that people are talking about, and that's kind of new in this conference, I think, in recent years, is cognitive presence. And this is the idea that your brain is working on something. Your brain is engaging with the material. And so that's cognitive presence, really, is that if the students, and by the way, this is talking about students, if the students' brains are engaged and working. And then the third one is teaching or instructor presence. And that one's a little bit different. And that one is talking really about just the teacher. And is the teacher available? Is the teacher responsive? Is the teacher present in the course? And so you'd find that if the teacher is responding to discussions, if the teacher is posting things each week, if the teacher is responding to emails and so forth. So social presence can be a little bit different than that, because social presence includes both, not just the instructor, but also other students, and whether they are socially present as well to you. So it splits those things up into social presence, cognitive presence, and teaching or instructor presence. But one study found, an interesting finding from this, is that the most important for attrition, meaning to keep students from dropping out of a distance course, the most important of these three is social presence overall, then teacher presence, and then cognitive presence, according to one study that I was able to view at the conference. So social presence still is king as far as keeping students in a class and engaged, then teacher presence, then cognitive presence. But the interesting thing about this is probably cognitive presence should be the most important to students. The fact that they're actually thinking about things, getting things done. And for those of you who remember back with Moore's framework on interactions in distance learning, there was teacher to student, there was student to student, and there was also student to content. Well, I think these three elements really fit well along with those, right? You have teacher to student, meaning instructor presence. You have student to content, meaning cognitive presence. And you have student to student, social presence. Although social presence does encompass more than just that, student to teacher as well a little bit. But it's an interesting other way to think about how these concepts overlap. All right, and then another study that I found that has to do with this class as well talks about online discussions. And they did a study and found that people are more likely to interact with someone that they knew before the class. Excuse me. So students are more likely to interact, if they knew someone before they took the class, they're more likely to interact with that person online. And they're also more likely to interact with someone they have interacted online with before in your class. And so the recommendation there was to make people interact with someone new at different periods during the start of an online course, because if they have started to interact with, if they only interact with one person, then they may just stay interacting with that one person all the time, and that would not increase their social presence, right? That would not increase that opportunity for them to interact with more and more people. And so the recommendation again is to make sure that people interact with someone new each time, or at a few periods during the beginning of a course. That way they have multiple people with whom they've already interacted and are willing to probably interact with again, as long as those interactions were positive. So those are just some results of some studies and some presentations at the conference, the AECT conference that I went to last week. But anyway, for this week, I wish you well. Go ahead and start working on that synchronous lesson. Schedule that. If you haven't already, it's time to get it scheduled and plan on preparing and presenting that session to whatever students you have chosen to present to. And have a great week.